$1.1 billion. That's how much the Mexican government seized from the Jalisco Cartel in 2020. In 2015, it was the mafia's turn for a loss. The Italian government seized 2 billion euros in bank deposits, 3,000 companies, and 12,000 properties from them before realizing they had bitten off more than they could chew. In their words, it was more difficult to manage the property seized from the mafia than it was to confiscate it. And that's because crime is a business, and some of the most profitable businesses in the world are also the most ruthless. So what are the 10 richest criminal organizations in the world, you ask? Let's dive in. Number 10, the Taliban. I bet you didn't expect to see the Taliban on this list, but I'm also sure you already know that the Taliban is a criminal organization. Founded in September 1994 by the evasive Mullah Mohammed Ammar and 50 students, the Taliban grew to become a real problem in Afghanistan. After attacking the Afghan government more times than once, losing and winning the Afghan territory from the US, the Taliban's now rule of Afghanistan have imposed their extremist ideals of the people. But those who have suffered the most have been the women and girls. They have blocked them from exercising their fundamental rights to expression, movement, and education, and have also blocked their basic rights to life, livelihood, healthcare, food, and water. Now, beyond their reign of terror, the Taliban is also run like a business, and that's what has allowed them to survive for so long. When they seize a territory, their first point of call is looking for how they can convert the manpower of the population under their control and the resources they have stolen into more wealth. And quite ironically, the Taliban's primary source of income comes from the production of a trade of illegal substance, mainly opium and heroin. They also get tens of millions from pirate mining of natural resources within the regions under its control, collecting ransom for hostages and from donations. But it gets deeper. The Taliban relies on the substance networks created and refined by the cartels of Mexico. And today, they've been able to make Afghanistan the biggest heroin growers and producers in the world. More opium is grown in Afghanistan than there are farms for coca in all of Latin America. And the result of this is that the Taliban is worth a staggering $800 million from Forbes' estimates. Number 9, Sinaloa Cartel. Over the past decades, the Sinaloa Cartel has grown to become one of the most influential drug organizations in the world. In the drug trade, there is hardly any cartel that has the presence, the exploits, and the bank that Sinaloa Cartel has. Even after their leader, El Chapo, got captured and locked in the most secure prisons in the world, his cartel remained relevant and profitable. Today, they control 60% of revenue globally. And Fortune magazine says the cartel's revenue sits at $3 billion annually. But this is where things get tricky. No one can tell for sure just how much the cartel truly makes. When El Chapo was captured, the cartel suffered some losses and lost some hundreds of millions worth of merchandise and distribution routes, but they recovered well enough to still remain at the top of the business pyramid. And according to El Chapo himself, the cartel is under new leadership. El Mayo, a shadowy figure who is rumored to be worth billions. So depending on who you ask, the Sinaloa Cartel could be worth as much as $6.5 billion and as unbelievably high as $500 billion. But since we can't accurately measure their net worth, we'll stick with the official estimate, $3 billion. Number 8, Ndrangheta. The second largest mafia organization in the world is the Ndrangheta. They were the first to get in bed with South American cocaine dealers, and as a result, today they control much of the transatlantic drug market distribution channels into Europe. In the past, they were integral to the rise of the infamous yet legendary New York crime families, and their presence is still felt in the US. So how much are they worth? Well, that figure sits pretty around $4.5 billion. And while it might seem staggering, it is justified because the organization is more than 2 centuries in the making. Now beyond their empire in Europe, the Ndrangheta had sustained a reputation as the ultimate peacemakers in conflicts. They have been known to organize meetings between warring factions and with other criminal organizations. It was this quality that led them to forge alliances with cartels in the 20th century and subsequently take control of Europe's drug scene. Make no mistake, the Ndrangheta are not a peace-loving mob. They can be deadly when they want to, but they know how and when to use diplomacy to get what they want. Number 7. Camorra. In 2005, this man, Cosimo di Lora, who at the time was the acting head of his family's clan under the Camorra, kidnapped, tortured, and burnt alive the former girlfriend of a rival as he tried and failed to get his location from her. This is not even the breadth of the Camorra's brutality, and yet, despite how much the government has cracked down on this organization, they still exist today. In fact, the Camorra is one of the most efficient and one of the most profitable surviving mafia organizations. How profitable? Fortune magazine estimates that the criminal group rakes in an estimated average of around 4.9 billion annually. And all of this is gotten from exploitation, firearms trafficking, narcotics peddling, gambling, and extortion of the most violent kind. One of the most amazing qualities of the Camorra is the fact that they don't have a centralized system of management. Unlike the pyramid-like structure of the Sicilian Mafia, where everyone knows who the godfather is, the Camorra is made of several individual clans that has bosses and operate within hundreds of affiliates. No wonder why they have been in existence since the 17th century. Number 6. Yamaguchigami. Most people know them as the Yakuza, but the Yakuza is an umbrella term for criminal organizations that exist within Japan. And of the lot, the Yamaguchigami are the largest. But they aren't just large, they are also thoroughly organized, incredibly influential, and ruthlessly disciplined. Founded in 1915 by a tenured criminal named Harukichi Yamaguchi, Yamaguchigami would pick up a century's worth of violence, and that violence is not exclusive to outsiders. If you mess up as a member, you're required to chop off your fingers or ear in a ritual of an atonement called Yubitsumi that reaffirms your loyalty to the codes and ethics of the gang. The Mafia and Yakuza share a lot in common. On one hand, the Yakuza actively involves themselves in dispute resolutions that often leaves them richer. And they are also known for their heavy involvement and control of the gambling sector and drug trafficking in Japan. And when it comes to their structure, they also piece themselves together like the American Mafia, familial relations bound together in elaborate hierarchies where the initiated give up their past life completely and adopt their new one. Now, make no mistake, the Yakuza is just as old as the American Mafia, and the Yakuza existed for hundreds of years. And that's part of why today they are worth a staggering $6.6 billion. Number 5. Solinskaya Bratva. Everyone knows that Russia is built different from the West. So you can imagine what a Russian mafia would look like, and more importantly, what it would be worth. Unfortunately for us, the Russian mafia does exist. They are called Solinskaya Bratva, and their founder, Sergei Mikhailov, would rather be called a businessman than a thief. The man started a criminal enterprise in the 1980s as a waiter who had served a prison term for fraud. It grew to become a dangerous gang of foot soldiers. These foot soldiers were originally local unemployed young men with aggressive tendencies, but with time, they expanded and became more organized, operating territories that stretched from Russia to the major parts of Europe, North America, and even Africa. Today, they deal in every type of criminal activity you can think of: racketeering, extortion, illegal gambling, arms trafficking, human trafficking, and much more. Their structure is highly decentralized. The organization is made up of semi-autonomous bridges that more or less operate independently from each other. However, they have a mutual respect for one another, and they will unite forces and resources if they encounter threats that surpass an individual brigade's capacity. What makes them especially dangerous is the fact that they are now on a level where they can influence the Russian state for their own benefit. And they've even been able to do this by reinvesting ill-gained wealth into legitimate businesses like casinos, financial institutions, and even an international airport in Russia called Vnukovo Airport. By 1990, they even got more sophisticated and began moving their blood money through banks. And this allowed them to get close to the Russian oligarchs, who are quite frankly not too different from the career criminals themselves. At the very top of the food chain, the Russian mafia is run by a 12-person council that routinely convenes to assess their organization. And today, they are 9,000 members strong. According to Forbes magazine, the Solinskaya Bratva is worth around $8.5 billion. Number 4. D Company. Have you ever heard of D Company? If your answer is no, then Dawood, the founder of the Indian terrorist unit, would be pleased, because the billionaire criminal has been a pain in the backside of the Indian state for more than 3 decades, yet no one has been able to nab him or bring down his multi-billion-dollar organization. According to some resources, he was 3rd on the FBI's most wanted list, and at some point, he has been blamed for several terrorist attacks as well as actively supporting ISIS. But it doesn't end there. Dawood's company, which he started in the 70s, ships an ungodly amount of heroin and opium. And today the criminal organization makes at least $6.7 billion yearly. But forget about the money for a second. The truth is this: no one knows how much Dawood's company is truly worth. They aren't sure just how he makes his money, and they don't even know where he is. Ever since he masterminded the 1993 Mumbai bomb blast, the Interpol, CIA, and the FBI have tried and failed to locate him. And the only reason they have estimates of his wealth is because of the businesses they were able to track. Dawood's might never be caught, and his true wealth might never come to light. Number 3. Sicilian Mafia. In March of 2014, a 4-year-old boy was shot dead, along with his mother and her boyfriend, near the southern city of Taranto in a suspected mob hit. The event was so shocking that Pope Francis spoke up against the mafia. But that's a small price to pay to become a member of the Sicilian Mafia, otherwise known as the Cosa Nostra. Many would literally kill to be members of the organization. And that's because Cosa Nostra is beyond just a criminal organization. It is a religion, a way of life. It is a life or death for every one of its members. The group had its humble origins in the 1800s in Sicily, Italy. Legend has it that it started as a prison gang that had a semblance of the same structure and values that the modern-day mafia still has. After years of refining and social climbing, they began to work hand in hand with oppressive governments, carrying several questionable assignments for the corrupt government officials. Eventually, they were forced to expand to the US and Europe when totalitarian governments took power. Today, they oversee a vast network of gambling, extortion, money laundering, human trafficking, and many others. Now, if you're wondering how much they're worth, it's somewhere in the region of $7 billion. Number 2. Gulf Cartel. Founded by Juan Nepomuceno Guerrera in the 1930s. The Gulf Cartel is one of the oldest and one of the most ruthless cartels in the world. From their domestic base in Mexico, they run international distribution networks into many parts of Europe and North America. However, their ruthlessness is what has made them survive for so long. Getting kidnapped by the cartel is often worse than a death sentence for a variety of reasons, but most likely because you're likely to disappear without a trace. This is what happened to the Cazares family in the 2011 Matamoros mass kidnapping. Despite the intervention of practically every law enforcement agency in the world, 5 men from the family are still missing to this day. The Gulf Cartel also has an affinity for every form of crime. Maybe it's because they have been around for so long, and maybe it's because law enforcement agencies have tried and failed to bring them down. Over the years, they have amassed a staggering amount of wealth that, according to most sources, is north of $10 billion. Out of all the cartels, they have suffered the most at the hands of anti-drug agencies, and yet they have survived. And it's a testament to not only their longevity, but their ability to remain profitable as an organization of crime. Number 1. The Triads. At the top of the food chain are the Chinese Triads. As an organization, the criminal enterprise has existed longer than many can trace, and it's without a doubt older than all of the other criminal organizations on this list. They have existed for hundreds of years and are involved in a host of criminal activities from racketeering to drug trafficking and murder. Today, their area of specialization is human trafficking, and they have been doing this for more than a century. One of the major reasons why it is so difficult to disband the Triad is because, like the Russian Mafia and the Camorra, this organization runs a decentralized structure, and they are incredibly secretive. So secretive that most of the operations still remain a mystery to this day. Over the years, the ones we know have extended across every continent on the globe, and they have participated in activities that are too graphic to show or even state here. Just know that for every individual that goes missing, there's a high chance that the Triad had a hand in it. So, how much is this nefarious organization worth? $13 billion. Someone dug out $5.3 million, $26 million, $6 million, $10 million, $600 million, and he had no idea. How rich do you have to be to burn $2 million just to keep warm? And why do you need to warm yourself by the fire if you're that rich? These are just two of the many questions surrounding Pablo Escobar and his fortune. This is the man who became the epitome of rags to riches. He went from poor farmer's son to a most wanted mob boss who made $145 million a day in cash. But what do you even do with that amount of cash? How do you keep it hidden when you've got two governments after you? Let's explore Pablo Escobar's money journey and how he hid all his money when he was already a wanted man. Pablo Emilio Escobar Gaviria was born on December 1st, 1949 in Rio Negro City in Colombia. His father was a farmer and his mother was a school teacher, but it wasn't just the three of them. Escobar grew up with 6 siblings. This wasn't unlike most Colombian families back then, but the problem was they were very poor. Desperate for cash, Pablo began a life of petty crime, stealing tombstones, sanding them, and reselling them. With that money, he got a new motorbike and went into commercial business robbery. Then, he stole cars, offered protection, and even kidnapped rich politicians for ransom money. As his crimes became more serious, his earnings piled up. The narcotics trade in Colombia was already a bustling business at the time, so it didn't take long for Escobar to join in on it.
They started to bring in, came from Peru, from Bolivia, and converting it into hydrochloride. And then from there, they had access to the Caribbean Ocean.
By the time he was 26, Escobar had amassed $3 million in cash. That's around the time when he created the infamous Medellin cartel. When Pablo started smuggling white powder into the United States, the business had a snowball effect.
As a result of that, it became the economic law of supply and demand. And the Colombian criminals are probably some of the more astute in the world.
Pablo had 15 airplanes and enough money to bribe every policeman in Colombia. It's easy to see how the more money he made, the more he controlled the police, so the harder he was to arrest. At the peak of his narcotics reign, Escobar made around $145 million in cash each day and $55 billion a year.
Forbes magazine came out with their richest men in the world, and he was right near the top of the list. So, right off the bat, you knew that this man was not a millionaire, he was a billionaire.
Every week, the Medellin cartel spent $1,000 on rubber bands, which they would use to wrap the ever-flowing money. Needless to say, all money Escobar made came in cash. Bank transfers weren't exactly an option in the criminal underworld. So in a way, the rubber bands were the first step in hiding the money. You'd have to organize chunks of money that you could easily count. Then you could deposit them more easily. But this was no easy task. Around $2.6 billion were lost just to mice and rats. Pablo Escobar kept most of his money hidden underground, in walls, barrels, and even under his own houses. Then, of course, there's money laundering.
On the outside, it's a nail salon, right? On the inside, it's the best money laundry a growing boy could ask for.
That's the safe way to hide your dirty cash, so to speak. But Pablo didn't do much of it. He had a few high-end restaurants, discos, football pitches, and houses for the poor in Medellin. But these were political moves, more than ways to hide his cash. He wanted to be a popular figure in Colombia, a sort of hero for the masses. Pablo would use most of his money to bribe politicians, the police, and to threaten authorities into submission. In fact, Escobar popularized the term plata o plomo, money or a lead. Do you want money or do you want a bullet? Once he tried to pay off a judge to avoid prosecution. When the judge wouldn't comply, Escobar had the judge and his whole family killed. When the money wasn't used on bribes or stored underground, Pablo made a literal empire for himself and his family.
The ranch had 9 man-made lakes, water slides, life-size dinosaurs made out of fiberglass. We estimate that he easily spent, maybe about $10 million in constructing that ranch.
He had expensive houses in Florida too, and his lavish lifestyle was not a secret. While he was hiding his literal chunks of money, he wasn't hiding the amount he had. His arrogance and his violence eventually brought the end of Pablo Escobar. And with his demise, the true nature of his money caches came to light. As the war between the DEA and the Medellin cartel became Escobar's sole preoccupation, the bloodbaths became more serious and more frequent. In 1991, over 450 policemen were killed in Medellin, and Escobar had put a $700 bounty on every officer. But the DEA was seizing tons of white powder, and they were slowly diminishing his cartel. So in June 1991, Escobar handed himself in. He went to a prison of his own choosing, a fancy palace where he ate chef-made food and played football 24/7. But after he became paranoid that 2 of his lieutenants had stolen money from him, he organized an escape. That's when the DEA started the last great pursuit of Pablo Escobar. So Escobar had all the money in the world, hidden in various pits and barrels, but he was now a man on the run. He couldn't use it to bribe his way out of this. Escobar would sleep in safe houses, but also in the jungles and forests surrounding Medellin. One day in 1992, he was stuck with his family in a tiny shack in the forest. It was freezing cold, and his little daughter was ill. All Pablo had on him was a bag full of cash. That night, he burned $2 million to keep his family warm. Desperate times call for desperate measures, right? By 1993, the DEA had managed to separate Escobar from his family, and he was all on his own. A vigilant group called Los Pepes worked together with the DEA, killing 300 cartel men. As he felt weaker, Escobar became more desperate, making risky phone calls and deals that led the DEA right to him. On a fateful day on December 2nd, 1993, Pablo Escobar was tracked to a house in Medellin. Seeing the DEA agents, Escobar climbed onto its roof, but he was an even easier target there. He was shot and killed. Both Colombian authorities and the DEA agents were over the moon.
Pablo Escobar was killed on that rooftop. The very first message transferred over the radio was, "Viva Colombia! Matamos a Pablo Escobar! Long live Colombia! We've just killed Pablo Escobar."
This was the end of a bloody reign of terror and the end of a notorious cartel. But the same couldn't be said about the money. It's not like they disappeared together with Pablo Escobar. So what happened to all his money after his demise? You might think that Escobar's bag of cash and luxurious estates would have passed on directly to his family after his death, but they were either seized by authorities or stolen from the Escobar family by rival gangs, finally powerful enough to overtake what was left of the Medellin cartel. Escobar's lavish villa did not fare so well either.
Some of the estate was gifted to low-income families. The animals were given to any zoo that would take them, and the villa was left to rot as an insult to the man who'd caused so many deaths.
Whatever money the family did have left, they spent on security, protecting themselves from the numerous attempts on their lives. Once they bought an entire hotel floor, and the Colombian government brought guards to the hallways. But imagine how much a stunt like this costs. They couldn't live like this forever. Slowly, those who survived from Pablo's family integrated into the normal world, trying to make money from legal work and staying out of trouble. So what about the huge chunks of money hidden underground and inside walls? Well, apart from Escobar, no one really knew where the money was hidden. He had dozens of men bury his money in chutes and bunkers, then shoot them so they wouldn't go back and steal it. This is where it gets interesting. To this day, most of Escobar's hidden money remains hidden. The DEA seized as much as they could, but they didn't dig the whole of Colombia looking for piles of cash. But every now and then, there would be a big discovery. In November 1989, someone found 3 barrels on the ground. They dug them out, and inside, they found 5.3 million wrapped in plastic bags. In 1990, someone dug out 26 million and 150 kilograms of gold bars. Imagine that! Then nothing seemed to happen until 2009 when a farmer found $6 million buried in the jungle. The site wasn't far away from Pablo's famous white powder jungle factories. Also in 2009, someone dug out $10 million from the grounds of Escobar's Hacienda Nápoles ranch. The ranch is now a museum, so it's unclear who found the money. But it wasn't just Escobar's own ranches that harbored enormous sums of money. In 2015, a 65-year-old farmer called Jose Cartalos was digging an irrigation trench. He struck something strange with his shovel. That's when he found a blue plastic container in the ground. As he dug, he realized there was a myriad of them. Jose was living on top of $600 million, and he had no idea. And in 2020, it was Escobar's own nephew, Nicholas, who discovered 18 million hidden in the walls of Pablo's former home. The first thing that shocked him was not the sight, but the smell.
El olor era impresionante, o sea, ese olor es peor que una mortecina multiplicado por 100.
Next to the money was a typewriter, a golden pen, several satellite phones, and a camera with an undeveloped film roll. Needless to say, almost all the money that is dug out and recovered today is given to the Colombian government. The government claims they use Escobar's fortune in social and economic programs. As of 2022, $75 million were found and seized by the Colombian authorities. But not all of the money was handed to the authorities. After Escobar's death, hundreds of people broke into the estate, looting cash, valuables, and breaking the dinosaur statues hoping they were filled with cash. Then there's Roberto Sendoya. Roberto claims he's Escobar's long-lost son. He was saved from a nasty shootout that killed his mom by an MI6 agent. The agent adopted Roberto and fled to the UK with him to protect him from rival cartels. Roberto only found out about his identity during his 20s. Then there was another plot twist. Roberto was by the side of his adopted father, the MI6 agent, who was on his deathbed. The agent then handed Roberto a coded note. The note was a map to several of Escobar's treasures. Since then, Roberto has been digging up money or trying to locate more hidden treasures. But it wasn't just peaches and cream from then on. Roberto confessed to the media that he was once kidnapped and tortured for hours by former Medellin rivals. Nicholas Escobar went through a similar ordeal while his uncle was still alive. So maybe don't go digging through the Colombian jungles. Still, most of Escobar's money is still hidden. Isn't this pretty exciting?
Women who are in violent industries have to prove themselves more than men. There is a tendency for women to be more violent than men.
You probably know Netflix's Queen of the South, brave and ruthless Teresa Mendoza, who will stop at nothing to gain the upper hand on the Mexican cartel. But what if I told you this character is based on a real female narco from Guatemala? Marlori Chacon Rosell.
She was part of this web that went right to the top of Guatemala's political as well as criminal elite. She was absolutely right in the eye of the storm.
That's right. It's slowly becoming clear just how big of a part women play in the Central and South American narcotics trade. Forget about Pablo Escobar and El Chapo. Las Petronas are taking the world by storm. Marlori Chacon was sentenced to 26 years in prison. 5 years later, she walked free. How did she do this? Let's explore this and many other questions surrounding the real Queen of the South. Marlori Chacon Rosell was born in Guatemala City, the capital of Guatemala, on October 4th, 1972. The first thing that became clear about Marlori was she was very smart.
I spoke to a former DEA agent and he said that had Marjorie been in the legal world, she could have reached CEO position in some big company, that she was very astute and had very high-end skills, and it just so happens that she decided to apply those in the trade instead.
Indeed, Marlory was never interested in the legal world. It's unclear whether her family had any ties to the Guatemalan cartels or whether she chose this path on her own. But Marlory was pretty young when she decided she was going to make the big bucks in the criminal underworld. After finishing high school, she enrolled in a university to study psychology. But after a few years, she dropped out and pursued the narcotics trade instead. She soon became one of Guatemala's top money launderers. Then, she became one of Central America's top money launderers. According to the DEA, she was once cleaning $10 million every month. She was doing a lot of this for the big Mexican cartels. The U.S. Treasury said,
Marlory Chacon's drug trafficking activities and her ties to the Mexican drug cartels make her a critical figure in the narcotics trade.
And you know how it is in the South American cartels. To climb to the top, you have to be extra ruthless. For Marlory, there was never an option to lay low. She wanted to get to the very top of the trade. She had all the money laundering skills one could have. But there was one thing she still lacked. To become the boss of a big cartel, you have to have connections, lots of them. So Marlory took her time and built relations all around Guatemala. First, there was Marlory's first drug deal in April 2004. She had promised to move a ton of coke to Colombia through Honduras. It was an $8 million deal, but Marlory's first buyer had pulled out. So she secured a new deal with Eliu Lorenzana, a powerful drug boss and the younger brother of Don Valde. Soon enough, she had a network full of drug bosses and ruthless criminal business people. Then came Las Patronas, a network of female narcos bosses in Guatemala, Mexico, Honduras, and El Salvador. These weren't just business-savvy women who laid low and laundered money for their male colleagues. They were vicious.
I mean, I was told she was sending out hits on people. I was told her brothers would kidnap young women, take them up to their mansion, rape them, pass them around the security guards.
And Marlory wasn't an innocent bystander either. She might have used her feminine charms to secure deals with cartel men, but before anything, she intimidated people with the many security guards that always surrounded her. Juan, a former cartel member, recalls,
She was a woman with a big presence and very intimidating because of the kind of people she was surrounded by. She moved with security everywhere. There was always someone at the door.
But Marlory didn't just buy the security guards herself, because by now, she had ties to the top dogs in the Guatemalan government. This is how she earned her nickname, the Queen of the South. Marlory had befriended people with very high functions in the government.
She was part of this web that went right to the top of Guatemala's political as well as criminal elite. She was absolutely right in the eye of the storm.
That's why she felt invincible. She and her business were protected by the government itself.
Marlory was guarded by the National Police. She had 3 or 4 cars with her from the Ministry of the Interior. It was security that was assigned to her.
Marlory was particularly close to Guatemala's Interior Minister, Mauricio López Bonilla. No one knows exactly how close they were, that is to say, if they were involved romantically. They were best buds, or simply tied through lust for money and power. But at one point in 2013, there were reports of Bonilla visiting Marlory at home. He was the one who greenlit Marlory's 24/7 protection as she moved from town to town, securing high-end narcotics deals. The security guards ordered by Bonilla even protected Marlory's many drug traffickers. He was officially keeping the cartel safe. Marlory was also friends with Roxana Valdetti, Guatemala's vice president. It's easy to see why she felt invincible. She could do anything she liked with official protection from the government. She could launder money, order hits, and secure transactions worth millions of dollars, all while climbing to the top of the Guatemalan cartel. The Queen of the South felt like no one could take her down, but things were about to take a drastic turn. As in the cases of Pablo Escobar and El Chapo, Marlory Chacon didn't limit herself to transporting drugs between Central and South American countries. Huge shipments of white powder would arrive in the US under her command. So by the mid-2010s, the DEA got involved. What would you do if you found out the DEA was on your tail, tracking your movements, and perhaps speaking to your crew?
Marjorie was incredibly valuable to the DEA, and when they sanctioned her, she realized that if she wanted to stay out of prison for the rest of her life, she was going to have to cooperate substantially.
That's right. Marlory didn't fight her cartel. In fact, she decided that if she was going down, she was going to take the whole cartel down with her. Marlory didn't even wait to be arrested by the DEA. As soon as they made contact, she flipped. She said she was going to help them take down her entire Guatemalan cartel and indict the corrupt ones at the top. Mauricio Lopez Bonilla and Roxana Baldetti were amongst the first ones arrested by the U.S. authorities.
Los testimonios de Chacón sirvieron para encauzar y condenar a varios acusados de narcotráfico y lavado de dinero, incluidos los empresarios Lorenzana de Guatemala.
Do you remember Eliu Lorenzana? He was the first drug boss Marlory went into business with. This is how ruthless she was. She was giving the DEA every single name she'd ever worked with. Why? On one hand, she wanted to make sure no one would come after her. On the other hand, she wanted to ensure her freedom, as she knew she was facing serious prison time. Roxana Baldetti and Mauricio Lopez Bonilla were both sentenced to prison in Guatemala on corruption charges. When their terms are over, they will most likely be extradited to the US to face charges. This means more prison time for the both of them. Interestingly, Bonilla was once the most important security contact for the United States in Guatemala on security and counter narcotics, so it's pretty shocking that he was protecting Marlory at the same time. What's even more shocking is Marlory's prison sentence. In 2014, she was facing 26 years in prison on several charges including drug trafficking and money laundering. She was supposed to serve this many years in Miami Federal Prison. The next year, she received a reduced sentence of 12 years. And in 2019, Marlory was freed on bail. She was freed after spending less than 5 years in prison. This goes to show just how much ratting on your former allies can reduce your sentence. But don't feel too bad for them. Cartels are usually a dog-eat-dog world. And if you think it's pretty badass for a woman to be an active member of the cartel, guess again. Most of these women are subjected to hard labor and minimal pay.
Nosotros somos pobres, sembramos, vendemos la hojita para mantener nuestro hogar y nuestros hijos educarlos. Dice que va a haber apoyo para dejarla sembrar las cocas. Hasta el día de hoy, ¿qué apoyo? Nada, ningún apoyo para nosotros.
Some women make it to the higher ranks, like paid assassins, but they often die young and a truly gruesome death. Remember La Flaca? She was left dismembered in various boxes around Mexico. She was around 20 years old. And the very few that make it to the top are so violent that it's no longer badass. When you kill and maim to get to the top of the trade, there's nothing empowering about it. There's another twist here. Female narcos often end up more violent than men just to prove themselves in this nasty business.
People who I know who have gotten close to women who've been as powerful as them say that women who are in violent industries, and this does absolutely relate to legal industries too, have to prove themselves more than men. There is a tendency for women to be more violent than men so that the men who are around them will take them seriously.
Women have been seen for so long as wives, girlfriends, or victims of infamous cartel men that many cartel men don't believe women are capable of violence. And this could be seen in the case of Marlory Chacon too. Apparently, during her Sebastiana Cotton Vasquez trials, the Lorenzana brothers were openly mocking them and interrupting their testimonies. In the end, the two women got their last words by testifying against them and seeing them jailed for life, while they got reduced sentences. After she was freed, Marlory never returned to Guatemala. It's unknown exactly where she lives, but it's safe to say she won't be visiting her home country too soon. After you've testified against pretty much all your former allies, it's probably unsafe to walk those streets. And with her politician friends in jail, it's unlikely she'll ever have official protection again. The Queen of the South's reign seems to have ended. She will have to live a normal, middle-class life now, staying out of trouble and giving zero reasons for the DEA to arrest her again. Now, while some newspapers claim Netflix's Queen of the South is based on Marlory's character, others say it's based on Sandra Avila Beltran. She was once nicknamed the Queen of the Pacific, and she was also a high-ranking cartel boss who ordered huge white powder shipments into the US. So it's hard to say if it was just one or another who inspired the series, or if the directors took inspiration from both female narcos. What's clear is that we live in an age that's finally recognizing the violent and ruthless women of the criminal underworld, and many of them are still out there. Who knows? Maybe even the Queen of the South is somewhere out there making sketchy deals in the shadows. Or perhaps she's just watching the Netflix show bearing her old name, reminiscing about days long gone. Hey, thanks for watching. Remember to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe for more. See you next time.